Today I'm going to show you a pincushion that I have made that is in the shape of a conifer tree. And so you could call this a Christmas tree since Christmas trees are usually made out of conifers. But just whatever. It's out of that type of a tree. This is actually an alternative kind of interpretation of an existing pattern out there where you would actually stuff the trees and you'd make it into a table topper. And so I got this idea off of Tracy from the sewing channel. I'm going to go ahead and provide the link to her tutorial, and in that tutorial she has the link to this pattern. And it's a free pattern, and you just basically print it out. I just printed out the first page because it was all I needed, because the other pages were if you were making the much larger trees. For mine is actually smaller than her smallest tree here. So what I did to do that, because her smallest tree would end up being about 6.5 inches tall, and I think that's too big for a pincushion. But if you're fine with a pincushion that big, you could totally do that. But what I did was I just went ahead and I just kind of eyeballed it about 1/2 inch in so that I could make this end up being about 5 to 5.5 inches. And then another thing that I found in doing this is that if you'll notice, this thing kind of doesn't really lay flat. And that's because when I stitched this up, it kind of became uneven that way. And so on what I am going to actually demo, I've gone ahead and I've hiked it up a little bit in, and then I'm hoping that's going to make it so that this is actually going to be really nice and flat when it sets on the table. And so right now I have the embroidery pin in there, and I'm going to end up using these to put some of my pins in. And I think, just festive for the holidays, but also in general, it's good at any time. Because right now, this is my pincushion. As you can see, this thing is just overloaded. And also, I feel like it'd be kind of nice if I had like 2 or 3 pincushions that I could station around my room. And so that's part of the reason why I'm doing this. She has this to where it's going to be on the fold line of the fabric. This is also a really great project for scrap fabric. If you have like a 9 to 9.5 inch, and then what is it? It's about 6 inches. Yeah, about 6 inches. So 6 inches by 9 to 9.5 inches across for your scrap, and that will work. And then that would be one of your colors. And so as you can see here, I have like this batik, and I have this batik. So this one I use the batik twice. Or you could have a 6 by 5 inches if you're going to have really, really scrappy and you'll have 4 different fabrics. Or if you want to have 2 different fabrics, then you can have a 6 by about 9.5 inches. Let's figure that out here. So what we want to do is we want that out kind of around 2.5 inches. Should line it up pretty well. Okay, and that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead. I find it's just easier if I go ahead and take a friction pen and mark around the template instead of trying to hold it and keep the template in place. And then, of course, if your fabric's really dark, then maybe you want to use a white chalk pencil. So just use whatever is going to work for your needs. So I'm just going to cut that out. So that looks pretty good. And you can see here that it is going in. So hopefully that's going to help make it so it lays flat. And then I'm just going to take this other side of it, and I'm going to see if I can line that up. And it looks like, yep, it's lining up really nicely. And then we'll see how that lines up. If they seem to line up pretty nicely, and they're lining up pretty decently there. So I have those 2 pieces, but like I said, this needs 4 pieces of that. So I have decided that I'm going to use selvages, because I think like selvages, it would look kind of festive. It would almost look like those ornament balls on the tree, I guess. What I did with that was I figured out what size muslin I needed. So I ended up, of course, needing around 9 to 9.5 inches across. And then I just kind of cut things a little bit at an angle there, a little bit at an angle there. And then I put Wonder Web down, and I just put my strips of the selvages on there. And if you'll notice, I kind of alternated them, and the reason why I did that is because if I had them all the same direction, then one of these would always be upside down when the other one would always be right side up. I fused them down, and then I went ahead and I just stitched some basic lines, and that will make it so that all of these will stay down through whatever wear that I put these through. Now that I have those, what I can do is I can put these on top of each other. I kind of have that finger press fold, so that'll kind of help, but I could use kind of the stitching as well if I wanted to on the selvage side, if I wanted to flip it over that way. So I have that, and then for this, what I need to do is I am going to leave like kind of a small opening on either side here. So maybe a little bit in there. So I'll leave like a small opening, be like about an inch. And then what I'll do is I'll stop it over on this side and on this side. And I'm trying to make it so that I have like a pretty good amount of space so that I can turn this. And so I'm going to go ahead and mark the other one. Then I will be ready to sew. All right, so I'm ready to sew these, but I'm going to do it the way that Tracy advises in her video. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch from the top down on one side, and then, stop it right there. And then I will stitch from the top down on the other side. And then the final stitching that I'll be doing is this bit here. And then just to make this something that is going to be a little easier to turn and close, I am going to have this area be more than a quarter of an inch. I'll probably go around maybe 3/8 of an inch. All right, so I have my pieces at my ironing station here. And so what I need to do is I am going to clip in, because whenever you have an inside curve, or in this case, inside point, you definitely want to clip into it. And then you're just trying to make sure that you don't accidentally clip through your seam. But by doing that, it'll make it so this actually turns easier. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to trim off the excess fabric at those points. All right, so we have those. And then what I want to do is I like to just press this up and press it along where these openings are going to be. And then I also like to just kind of do a press on one side, just because it makes it so that it just turns easier if I do that. And in this case, because I have the selvages, I'm just doing it on the fabric that doesn't, that's a whole cloth fabric. So, because the selvages are kind of going to be, a little uneven and stuff. So, just doing that. And it takes a little bit of extra time to do this, but it is well worth it when you go to turn this. Okay. And then additionally, I'm going to do it on this side, only on the bottom, just because I want every last bit of help that I can get on that. So there we go. Okay. All right. So that's pretty good. And so basically, yeah, it's not a lot of space, but let's see, it looks like this is maybe a little bit more, I don't know. There's not a whole lot of space. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to try to poke out these bits here. So I just need to tuck these bits in as well as we can. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and do the turning process on the other half of this, and then I'm going to go to the next step. I have the two tree pieces there. What I want to do next is I'm going to stack them on top of each other. And then on the selvage side, I pretty much went down the center. So let's see, I think it's a little bit more centered on this side. So I'm going to do that. So I pretty much went down the center with the seam on that selvage side. So I'm just going to use that. And then if I want to have a little bit there so I can just drag it up, I could. And I did that on the other tree. And so that would be an easy enough thing to do. Like I could take a little piece of either a ribbon or like this is some selvage. And to do that, I would just put it right in there. And then I would just go ahead and just stitch it down like that. But on this one, I'm going to leave that off. So I need to get this into place. And there's a lot of bulk here, actually. So we're going to do that. Ooh, okay. 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 And then I have that. And so now I am ready to fill this. Okay, so I have some walnut shells. That's what I'm going to fill this with. I have seen all kinds of different things, like some people do rice, some people do beans, dry beans, obviously, and dried rice. So the nice thing about the walnut shells is that they're supposed to kind of help sharpen the needles whenever you stab the pincushion. And I've even heard of people putting in, like, things like dried lavender just to make it smell nice, maybe mix that in with something like rice or walnut shells. And I guess you could even do some stuffing as well. So this ends up taking kind of around a cup, maybe a little under a cup. And so, because it ends up being about 2 tablespoons on each side. So I'm just going to get a little bit started there. And then I'm just going to shake it up here, just try to kind of pound it in. So, okay. Trying to get this to go in. And one of the things I've noticed is they like to kind of get jammed up around the top. And as you can see, like these areas are pretty narrow. So there's a lot of things like seams that kind of get in the way. I'm going to see what I can do here without making a mess, I hope. Okay. All right. So I have a fork here that's kind of got like a skinny end. Maybe you have like a chopstick, and that can be useful. And so what I'm doing is I'm just using that, and it's nice and blunt, so I don't have anything sharp that might cause damage to all of this hard work that I've done so far. And so I need to kind of make it so I can get those walnut shells to go in there. Okay, so I'm starting to feel some shells. Okay, good. That's actually feeling like we're getting pretty full there, so that's nice. Okay, and so I'm going to put the funnel right there, and then I can just get that to go down be prepared for the possibility of a little bit of mess during this process. Okay, so that's looking like it's getting pretty stuffed there. All right, so that was 1 tablespoon worth. Okay, so I'm just getting more of that in. We're just trying to cram it really nice and full and get this thing as perky as we can get it. Okay, so that is pretty good. I can get a little bit more in there. Yep, now we're getting a mess. Okay. Okay, there we go. And I'm not going to stitch this closed at the sewing machine. I'm going to do like Tracy shows, and I'm going to do a hand sewing to this. Okay. I do want to try to get this as filled as I can, because especially since I am hand sewing it closed, I can really get a lot of good stuffing into this. And then I'm just going to grab binder clips. I'm going to have 1 binder clip per thing here, per wedge of tree, I guess. I guess they're kind of like wedges. So, okay. And then I can just move on to the next one so you can see how nice and stuffed that first wedge is. And start getting this in there. I'm trying to get that to travel down. Okay. All right, so, oops. Yeah, this can be a messy process. So. Okay. And I'm just taking that and I'm going to get those walnut shells right down into that tip. Ooh, look at that. That's nice. That is nice. Okay, so I'm going to keep filling this up, and then when I'm done, I'll show you how I close it off. So I have it all nice and stuffed here, and you can see it's really nice and full there. I've gone ahead and I have gotten some embroidery floss, green thread that's kind of a nice bright color like this green here. I thought worked nice, would work well. And I have like kind of an embroidery needle here. Maybe you'd even call it a tapestry needle. I don't know. And so I'm just going to go ahead and take one of these sides and just going to go in through there. And I have it knotted here. I did a double knot. And then usually what I do is I like to have just a double strand type of thing that I'm working with. So that's what I'm doing here. And I'm just going to simply take it through and try not to get my thread to knot there or get caught on anything. And just going to gradually take that across, and it's nice. It is actually blending very nicely into that. So I think that is working pretty well. So I have that closed up pretty well, and then I'm just going to work it back, and I'm just going to go roughly in between where I see that I've stitched on that original line. Now Tracy recommends the embroidery floss because she says that it's a stronger thread, so I figure, okay. You know, she's made a bunch of these where she's stuffed them really full. So I'm going to definitely take her word for it. Now I could try to sew this closed at the sewing machine, but since it's walnut shells, I don't want to do that because that might really damage my machine if a bunch of walnut shells get into the inner workings. I think it's just easier in this case to just go ahead and do the hand stitching. And it really doesn't take very long. Obviously longer than doing it by machine, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it takes very long. Okay. And so I'm going to go ahead and finish up all of the rest of this, and then we get to see what it looks like when it's finished. And here we go, just like that. I have this all completed. I have it all stitched up here. So none of that stuffing is going to fall out. Here they are. So this is the one that I made before, and then this is the one I made for this video. And I think it turned out really well. I think it does add kind of a nice little festive thing, almost like it's the ornament, the Christmas ornament balls, and even have little flowers, a little bit of flowers up there. And then that Tula Pink Hexie fabric kind of has like a whimsical sort of thing that way for these trees as well. And then this was fabric that I found as a fat quarter. It kind of looks like a cutting mat, and then it has all these little sewing icons. So I thought that would be just perfect for a sewing room. Unfortunately, it did not end up laying completely flat, so it does have a little bit of a thing. It's not as severe as the first tree. You can see the first tree is pretty severe. It'll work. I mean, it still works. It just doesn't lay completely flat, which is sort of annoying. You know, if you have any idea of how to make these things lay flat, definitely leave a comment below, and that way you can help anyone else that wants to try to make this. And definitely, you know, if you do head over and watch Tracy's video on this, give her a shout out, tell her I sent you over, because I like to have us fellow quilter channels support each other. And I think for this, I'm going to put these quilters basting pins in here. And then that's going to make it so it just really tidies this up nicely. And then, I don't know, maybe I'll put the leaves in this one. You know, leaves in a tree. How about that, huh? Here we go. And so, like I said before, I'm going to have a link in the description that leads to Tracy's video and Tracy's pattern. So go ahead and check that out, and see you next time.